How many times do you think Jerusalem, the name Jerusalem, appears in the Bible? Anyone want to make any suggestions?
400.
400?
No, it's more than that.
More than that? Any advance on more than 400?
600.
600.
Zion.
Well, you're not far out now, because it occurs 660 times in the Old Testament, 146 times in the New Testament. That makes a total of 806. Now, if there are clever ones amongst you that would ask then the question, what about the word Zion? That occurs 152 times, so we're nearly up to 1,000 times. Well, Zion, if you weren't aware, is a specific location, a hill in the city of Jerusalem, but sometimes it's used just to refer to the city itself. So it's a bit of a grey area to say whether it should or shouldn't be counted. But it's not the actual numbers that concerns me, it's the volume of numbers. Number of times Jerusalem appears in the Bible is fairly huge. The Bible's a big book, you might say, and it must mention lots of places lots of times. So, second question, what's the second most commonly mentioned place in the Bible? Anyone want to hazard a stab a guess at that? The second most commonly mentioned place. One suggestion, Babylon. Any other suggestions? Place rather than, well, I suppose, yes.
Oh, Israel.
Now you're tripping me up now, because I was thinking of towns or cities. Towns or cities. But it surprised me actually to discover, according to the internet, of course, that the next most commonly mentioned place is Bethel. And that occurs 65 times. Hardly a drop in the ocean, is it, compared to the number of times that Jerusalem has it hands down in Bible terms. We might wonder whether it's actually mentioned in other religious books. Existing in Jerusalem are three religions: Christianity, Judaism and Muslim. We can certainly understand the first two because they are closely linked. The Jews and the Christians have a common history through the Old Testament, became Christianity in the New Testament after Jesus, of course. So we can see the link there. But although Muslims view Jerusalem as a holy city, I'm told that the name of the place Jerusalem is significantly absent from the Quran. It is, of course, a city that is most disputed over and often in the news, no least at the moment. But I'll refer to that occasionally. But this address isn't about the current political situation specifically. It's about a bit of an exploration as to why Jerusalem is, in fact, no ordinary city. What caused Jerusalem to be so frequently mentioned in the Bible? If we asked anybody we might come into contact with, what city would be the most appropriate city to be the capital of the world, given a scenario where there's one rulership in the whole world? I wonder whether people would have chosen Jerusalem. New York, perhaps. Moscow, possibly. London, if you are patriotic like that, you might suggest. Well, when we look at Jerusalem on the map, and that's the map of the world that's most frequently placed before us, we discover that Jerusalem would appear right in the centre of that map. That's the way the world is set out, isn't it? Normally on flat maps. But it is a place where three continents meet. So in terms of its centrality to the continents of the world, three major continents, Jerusalem really is in the centre of that, viewed in human terms. On the other hand, we could say, naturally speaking, that Jerusalem isn't a city close to trade links by sea. It's 27 miles from the coast in Israel, not an ideal place for a nation's capital. or even the world capital as such, has no natural resources particularly of its own. But God has chosen Jerusalem, as we'll be discovering as this address proceeds, as a future capital of the world, because God can provide resources in any place, because he indeed controls all nature. Indeed, what is unique about Jerusalem is that through Bible history, it is clear that God himself has chosen Jerusalem as a particular place which he wants to be associated with, and which will eventually be a world capital. So we want to explore these concepts from the Bible this afternoon. Well, let's start at the beginning of the reign of, I forgot to put those up, there we are, of King Solomon, a very rich and successful king of Israel. He was the son of King David, and he built a great temple in Jerusalem according to a pattern that God had shown him. The temple being completed, God showed his presence and his glory in that place, in a cloud, which designated to man that God was present there. Here's what Solomon then quotes God as saying. God says, "Since the day that I brought my people out of the land of Egypt, I chose no city in all the tribes of Israel in which to build a house that my name might be there, and I chose no man as prince over my people Israel, but I have chosen Jerusalem, that my name may be there." And Solomon had built a temple in Jerusalem, and the presence of God had manifested itself, confirming the presence of God there in Solomon's day. I'm a bit behind with my quotations, aren't I? I must remember to press the right buttons at the right time. Apologies for that. But that's just the quote I've just read to you, and that last few words there. I have chosen Jerusalem, that my name will be there. God had chosen Jerusalem to be the capital of the kingdom of Israel when it existed. And so, by the decree of King David 3,000 years ago, Jerusalem became the capital of Israel. King David, that was Solomon's predecessor, had begun his reign in Hebron because he had to fight the inhabitants of Jerusalem, who were already established there, in order to take the city and establish it as the capital city. And David reigned there for 33 years. And it's remained Israel's capital ever since. Even though other nations have conquered and settled in the land of Israel, none has ever declared Jerusalem as their capital. And the Jewish community, larger or smaller, has resided there. And of course, the topic of another address, I'm sure, would be the return of God's people, Israel, to their land over the last century or so. But we don't want to pause too much on that. But just thinking about the place Jerusalem, we discover that even before King David's time, there were significant references to Jerusalem as an important place in God's mind. For example, Abraham, a really important Bible character, the father of the Jewish nation, met a king and a priest called Melchizedek, who blessed him. And Melchizedek, we are told, was the king of a place called Salem. It doesn't take much mental gymnastics to realize that S-A-L-E-M is the last part of the word Jerusalem. And Melchizedek blessed Abraham. Such Salem or Shalem means to be complete or peaceable in Hebrew. Though I have to say that it's been anything but a place of peace recently. So not only was there a godly king and a priest in that place, but there is an association with peace. And that seems to point to a future age that the Bible also talks of, and we'll come to that later. So later in Abraham's life, we read that God tested him and asked him to take his son Isaac to go to a place in the land of Moriah and offer him as a burnt offering. And that's recorded for us in Genesis chapter 22 and verses 1 and 2. So what's that got to do with Jerusalem, you might ask me? Well, various historians have made stabs at where Moriah might be. Those that perhaps don't know their Bibles very well may have come to alternative conclusions. But it was Jerusalem because there is another reference in the Bible to this place Moriah in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 3 and verse 1, where we read that when Solomon, who we referred to just now, began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, he built it on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David, on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, the place provided by David. So, this great act of testing that Abraham underwent took place on that ground, which was eventually be the foundation of the city of Jerusalem. It's clear, isn't it, that God arranged for important things to happen in this place. And so it was a special place for God. More than just the capital of a nation or a country, like we might have a capital of England or Scotland, but a place which God had chosen, and a place where God arranged for important things to happen throughout Bible history. A place which he had specifically associated with. So, let's go to some Bible passages then that talk about God choosing Jerusalem as an important place. These give us additional insights indeed as to his future plans for the city. Here's a couple of verses from a psalm. For the Lord has chosen Zion, and I suggested earlier that is the same place as Jerusalem, or a place within Jerusalem. He has desired it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. Here will I dwell, for I have desired it. I put the forever in red because it's actually telling us that this isn't just a passing event of Jerusalem being an important place. It will be an important place in the future as well, forever. It may not seem so at the moment that Jerusalem is going to be a place where God dwells because of all the conflict that goes on in the area. That's what God had said through the psalmist in Psalm 132. God has chosen Jerusalem and he has a plan to dwell there forever. Of course, we know that the city hasn't been at peace for a long time because God's people, for their wickedness, have suffered and often been displaced. But Jerusalem has always remained in the hearts of the people who know their scriptures and know that God has a future plan for peace, as the term Jerusalem, Shalem, city of peace, implies. Now, in Bible history, of course, after the time of David and the kingdom of Israel fell into disrepute and disrepair, people didn't follow God, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, the two parts of the kingdom which existed within the land of Israel, were eventually destroyed and the people taken into captivity. Yet those people in captivity who were taken to Babylon, they had a great longing to return to Jerusalem. In the background there's an impression of what the city of Babylon might have looked at. And in this particular psalm, which Andy's going to read for us, we read of the people, God's people, in captivity in Babylon, because they knew their Bible history, they knew where their roots were, yearning to be back in Jerusalem. They longed to return. So let's listen to Psalm 137.
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hung our harps upon the willows in the midst of it. For there those who carried us away captive asked of us a song. Those who plundered us requested mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. Remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it to its very foundation. O daughter of Zion, who are to be destroyed, happy the one who repays you as you have served us. Happy the one who takes and dashes your little ones against the rock.
These people then that were taken away from the land of Israel into captivity in Babylon, they really recognized how important Jerusalem was above everything else. Did you notice those verses where it says, if I forget you, let my right hand forget its skill? If I forget Jerusalem, there's no point in living. There's no point in doing anything. Life is vanity. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, O Jerusalem. And if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. No greater joy could they have than to be back in the land of Israel, in Jerusalem, a place that was fixed in their minds as a dwelling place for the future. And so it was so important to the people in captivity that Jerusalem should be retained and that they should be able to return there. Babylon could be destroyed, they say, and good for anybody that helps to destroy you. But against that, with that in the background of their minds, is the city of Jerusalem, which they yearned for so strongly. Well, Jesus, again, I've said all those things, haven't I? God's people in captivity yearned to be back in Zion. They felt displaced from their land. They vowed never to forget Jerusalem. It would be their city of joy, and they were confident that God would punish their enemies. Well, coming on to Jesus' time, Jesus too spent time in Jerusalem. He went with his family as a boy to Jerusalem to worship. Remember the little story of him being left behind and staying to listen to the teaching and contribute to the discussions, and his parents being worried about him. And then, of course, later on, he visited Jerusalem on a number of occasions. He ministered in other parts of Israel, in Galilee, in other places, Capernaum, but Jerusalem was a place which he went frequently. And so towards the end of his ministry, he says, as a prophecy to his followers, his disciples, his fellow believers, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. He actually says it's not going to be easy for Jerusalem. Although God set his heart on it, there would be issues. There would be times when Jerusalem would be trodden down and almost completely destroyed. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the city depart, and let those who are out in the country not enter. For these are the days of vengeance, to fulfill all that is written. And if you dig back into the Old Testament prophets, you will see that for Israel's wickedness, God would punish them in measure, but not completely destroy his people. And so we are not surprised that Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. The people were scattered among many nations. But in more recent days, we know that they have returned and they are there in that city. But as I say, it's a city with a mixture of religions at the moment, and it's a place of great conflicts which don't seem to be easily put to bed or put right. So we have then prophecies in the Old Testament which tell us that Jerusalem will be a place of conflict in the future. This is Zechariah in the Old Testament, talking about Jerusalem being a cup of staggering to the surrounding people. There would be a siege, and Jerusalem would be a heavy stone for all peoples. And it's interesting that it is a place where if people try to resolve the conflicts, they're doomed to failure. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves, and all the nations of the earth will gather against it. And well, this address has been around for a few weeks now, but we see continually the conflict hotting up in the region, and nations now becoming less supportive of Israel's position. Again, probably another talk about that could easily be put together. But I'm interested in the fact that the centre of the conflict is around this place, Jerusalem, as the Bible said it always will be. And look at this one, again from the prophecy of Zechariah, talking about the time when nations will be gathered against Jerusalem to battle. And the Lord will go and fight against those nations, as when he fights on the day of battle. Now, some would say that that's partly happened before. But when we get to the next little paragraph here from Zechariah's prophecy in chapter 14, we see a reference to his feet. Well, whose feet, we might wonder, standing on the Mount of Olives. And we see here a prophecy of an earthquake at the Mount of Olives. Mount of Olives being split in two from east to west. A very wide valley, so that one half of the mount will move northward and the other half southward. If the other prophecies about Jerusalem have taken place, surely this one is also going to take place. I do remember many years ago, there were some plans to build a travel lodge or some kind of hotel, motel on the Mount of Olives. Yet those who surveyed the land said, don't build it there because there's a fault line underneath, and the likelihood of an earthquake taking place there is very, very strong. And so it is quite possible then that the Mount of Olives will split in two. Not just possible, but certain as a future event, because the Bible has said so. There will be an earthquake in that place. There will be a change in the geography of the land, and living waters will flow out of Jerusalem. And this will be a future time when the Lord will indeed be the king over all the earth. On that day, the Lord will be one and his name one. And we can see events unfolding, leading to more trouble for Jerusalem. What we can't predict is exactly when this particular earthquake will take place. But we do know that when it happens, it will be a catastrophic event, not just for Jerusalem, but for the whole world. Such a huge earthquake will have its ramifications and its ripples around the whole world. And this is what the prophet Zechariah is telling us will happen in the future. Astounding events. But whose feet? His feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives. Well, when we look at the time when Jesus, having risen from the dead and appearing to the disciples in that place, we are told that the angels came and spoke to the disciples, and as they were gazing into heaven, these two angels said, "This Jesus, who was taken up from you into heaven, will come in the same way as you have seen him go." And where were they at the time? They returned to Jerusalem from the mount just outside the city called Olivet, the Mount of Olives. Isn't Acts chapter 1 telling us that the feet referred to in Zechariah, who prophesied before Jesus was born, is referring to the future time when Jesus will return to the earth and his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. All these things then were leading us to a time when this ordinary city, if we could call it that, well, it isn't an ordinary city, when this city that is no ordinary city will be transformed into a glorious city, a city where there will indeed be peace when the conflicts have been laid to rest, when Jesus, the future king, returns to the earth. Look at some poetic words from the prophecy of Isaiah, which talks in poetry about this future time. The nations shall see your righteousness, and all the kings your glory, and you shall be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord will give. You shall be a crown of beauty in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of your God. For as a young man marries a young woman, so shall your sons marry you. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. And figuratively speaking, we see Jesus as a coming bridegroom. He speaks of himself in those terms, the bride being the company of believers. Some, perhaps a bit old-fashioned language, talk about a multitudinous bride, a bride of a number of people who have followed Jesus, and that marriage, that association will be complete when Jesus comes, and he will reign from Jerusalem, this place which God has chosen, a crown of beauty. Apologies for the picture, which I don't think is, it's a bit like a block of flats with a dome on the top. Sorry about that. But when we go to the very end of the Bible, the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, where future things were revealed to John on the Isle of Patmos by Jesus himself in visionary language. And much of Revelation, I admit, we will find quite challenging to understand, taking us through all sorts of historical events which were to take place after the time that the prophecy was given. But I don't think we can argue with this thought from Revelation chapter 21, when there will be a new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. And again, this idea of the bride and the bridegroom are mentioned here, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God." And so, all the way through the Bible, we've seen that God has an association with Jerusalem. He's chosen it. It's a place where he wants to dwell. It's a place where he's organized lots of things to happen, which are significant in Bible history. It's a place that was the capital of the Jewish, the Israelite nation when they existed. It's a place now which is in the center of Israel, which is a place of conflict and war. Yet it's a place where God has chosen he will dwell in the future. And it's a place where Jesus will reign when he returns to the earth. Well, there's a lot more that could be said about Jerusalem, and I'm sure you'll recognize that a lot of things I've missed out, possibly, from the Bible. You would be very welcome to look through the prophecies and look through, if you have a concordance, look at the number of times that Jerusalem is mentioned in the Bible and see so many things about the city which God has spoken and men of God have talked about. But just to summarize then, we've established, I hope, that Jerusalem is a place chosen by God. It's referred to throughout the Bible as a central place in God's purpose, not only just happening to be in the center of that world map that I showed you at the beginning, but central to God's purpose as well. Referred to from Genesis to Revelation, the capital of the kingdom of Israel when it existed at the time, set up by Solomon, who built a temple there. God has always said it's his intention eventually to dwell with men, and the place where he wants to dwell is Jerusalem. It was, of course, a place just outside the city wall where Jesus himself was crucified. But there are prophecies about it being a place of great controversy, a place of trouble, a place where those who try to organize and sort out the problems always seem to be failing. But it has a future role as a city of a great king, the place to which Jesus will return when that time is right, and a place where God will ultimately dwell with men. Yes, Jerusalem, no ordinary city.